In this video, I'm going to be running through the SAT practice test number 5. This is the math section, and this is the no calculator section. 25 minutes, 20 questions. It's about a minute 15 per question. Let's get to it. And yes, I'm sure you're probably wondering, holy cow, this video is so long. I only have 25 minutes. Why is the video so long? Well, that's because I go into kind of a lot of explanation. So just bear that in mind. When you're taking this test, you have to be very careful with your time management. So if the question looks like it's too complicated, you might consider skipping it and coming back to it if you have time at the end. Some questions only take a couple of seconds, others take a couple of minutes, but I go into some explanation, so just keep that in mind. Question 1. Which of the following is an equation of line L in the xy plane? We're given 4 equations, and let's just look at the graph. We can see that the y-intercept of this graph is 1, and the rise over run is 1, 1, 1, 1. So rise over run is equal to 1 over 1, so that means that the slope is equal to 1. The y-intercept is equal to 1, so if we use y equals mx plus b, we can then determine that y equals 1x plus 1, which simplifies to x plus 1, which is option D. Number 2. The circle above with center O has a circumference of 36. What is the length of minor arc AC? So minor arc AC is this guy up here, and since this is a right angle, each one of these arcs will be equal. So if the total circumference equals 36, that means that each of these arcs is going to be an equal portion of that 36. So if we divide that 36 into 4 equal parts, we get that each arc has a length of 9, which means that A is the answer. Number 3. What are the solutions to the quadratic equation 4x squared minus 8x minus 12 equals 0? So there's a couple of ways you can solve this. Since each coefficient of the quadratic is even, that means that there's a common factor of 2. So we can simplify this a little bit. So if we factor out a 2 from each one, we get 2x squared minus 4x minus 6 equals 0. And these coefficients are also all even still, so we can factor out another 2 from each one. So then we get x squared minus 2x minus 3 equals 0. Now you can use the quadratic formula. You can factor it into two binomials, which I'm going to go ahead and pull out the quadratic formula. So x is going to equal the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Plug in what we know, so that we know the opposite of b is 2 plus or minus the square root of b squared, negative 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 3. Don't forget the negative. All over 2a, and a is 1. And this simplifies to 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 minus negative 12 all over 2. And that simplifies to 2 plus or minus square root of 16 over 2, which simplifies to 2 plus or minus 4 over 2. And since now we have a plus or minus, we can have 2 plus 4 over 2 and 2 minus 4 over 2. 2 plus 4 over 2, 6 over 2, which is positive 3. 2 minus 4 is negative 2 over 2, minus 1. So our terms are negative 1 and positive 3, which is option B. Number 4. Which of the following is an example of a function whose graph in the xy plane has no x-intercepts? So we're familiar with the y-intercept of a line or a function being the point at which it crosses the y-axis, but an x-intercept is basically the same thing. It's just where it crosses the x-axis. So if we look at each one individually, a linear function whose rate of change is non-zero. So a zero rate of change would mean that it's completely flat and it never touches. This one does have when it is non-zero, it indeed will never touch the x-axis, but that's not what the first option says. A linear function whose rate of change is non-zero. So if it is non-zero, that means it's either going up like this or down like this, which means at some point it'll touch. So it is not a quadratic function with real zeros. Quadratic function with real zeros means it has x-intercepts. It can either be like this, or it can be like this. It can even be like this, where it just touches once. See, all of these right here mean that the quadratic has real zeros. It's the same thing as saying it has x-intercepts. So this one is not what we're looking for. A quadratic function with no real zeros. Let's see what option C would look like. So if our quadratic has no real zeros, that means it doesn't touch the x-axis anywhere. These will have zeros, but they'll be complex with imaginary numbers in them. So this one is in fact what we're looking for. But what's a cubic polynomial with at least one real zero? Well, if it has one real zero, that means it touches the x-intercept. A cubic sometimes looks like this, or it can look like this. That's a really funky looking cubic, but pretend it's a cubic. All cubics have at least one real zero, so D is not it. C is our answer. Number 5. In the equation above, k is a constant. If x equals 9, what is the value of k? The function we have is the square root of x plus 2, all that minus x, and equals 0. It gives us that x equals 9, and that only leaves us with one variable left in the equation, which we can solve for. So let's plug the value that they gave us for x into the function, the equation. Square root of k plus 2 minus x equals 0. So if we plug 9 in for x, we get square root of k plus 2 minus 9 equals 0. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to add 9 to both sides. Those terms cancel. Square root of k plus 2 equals 9. To undo the square root, all we got to do is square both sides. So we end up with k plus 2 equals 81. Subtract 2 from both sides. We end up with k equals 79, which means that D is our answer. Number 6. Which of the following is equivalent to the sum of the expressions a minus 1 and a plus 1? And it gives us some options. So the sum of the expressions, which means a squared minus 1 is being added to a plus 1. So a squared minus 1 plus a plus 1. These two expressions get added to each other. So to combine them, we got to get rid of the parentheses. There's no coefficient outside this first expression, so pretty much the parentheses can be eliminated. A squared minus 1 plus a plus 1. And now all we have to do is combine like terms and simplify. There's only one term with a in it that is raised to the second power, so a squared remains the same. The next lowest exponent is positive 1 on this term, and there's no other term like it, so we have plus a. Then we have negative 1 and positive 1, which cancel. And that only leaves us with a squared plus a, which means that answer A is our answer. Number 7. Jackie has 2 summer jobs. She works as a tutor, which pays $12 per hour, and she works as a lifeguard, which pays $9.50 per hour. She can work no more than 20 hours per week, but she wants to earn at least $220 per week. Which of the following systems of inequalities represents this situation in terms of x and y, where x is the number of hours she tutors and y is the number of hours she works as a lifeguard? Holy cow, that's a lot of words and a lot of numbers. So let's just look at what our options are. It gives us 4 systems of equations, and one of the convenient things about these particular answers, if you look carefully, on the left side of each equation, every option is exactly the same. The only difference between each of these options is the combination of the greater than or equal to and less than or equal to symbols. So let's just take, we have to pay very close attention to the words that are in the problem. It says how much money she can make for each job, and then it says she can work no more than 20 hours per week, but she wants to earn at least 220 per week. So this tells us that there's some inequalities that we have to pay attention to. So for the per week, no more than 20. No more than means she can make 20. 20 is good. 19 is also good. But 21, nope, can't do it. She cannot work 21 hours. She can work 20 or less. So that means that whatever function calculates how many hours she works, it can be less than or equal to 20. For how much money she wants to make, this one should be rather intuitive. She wants to earn at least 220. She can make, if she makes 220, she's happy. If she makes 230, she's happy. But if she makes 219, unhappy. So this means that she needs to make whatever function comes up with how much money she makes, as long as it adds up to at least 220 or greater than or equal to 220, she's happy. So now let's look at our options. The only option that has less than 20, there's 2 of them, this one and this one. That means these options are gone. And then we have to check for greater than or equal to 220, which means option C is our answer. Number 8. In air, the speed of sound s in meters per second is a linear function of the air temperature T in degrees Celsius and is given by s of t is equal to 0.6 T plus 331.4. Which of the following statements is best interpretation of the number 331.4, which is that number there? And then it gives us some options. The speed of sound in meters per second at 0 degrees C, the speed of sound in meters per second at 0.6 C, the increase in the speed of sound in meters per second that corresponds to an increase of 1 degree Celsius, and or the increase in speed of sound in meters per second that corresponds to an increase of 0.6. If we look carefully at this function, s of t equals 0.6 t plus 331.4. This value here is temperature. T stands for temperature. So it's written in y equals mx plus b format. So whenever 0 is our value for their independent variable. In this function we have t. That means the only value that's left over is the y-intercept. In this case, it's 331.4. The speed of sound in meters per second at 0 degrees C. So if we plug in 0 for t, 0.6 times 0 plus 331.4, the 0.6 times 0 cancels out to 0, and we know that the speed at 0 degrees C is going to equal 331.4. So that means that A is our answer. Number 9. We're given two equations. If x, y is a solution to the system of equations above, and x is greater than 0, what is the value of x times y? So it gives us two equations and two unknowns. So I'm going to, since for the first equation, y is already isolated, so I'm going to use the first equation and substitute the value into the second one. So I'm going to rewrite 2y plus 6 is equal to 2x plus 3. And I'm going to take this equation and substitute it in for our value of y. So I have 2 times x squared plus 6 equals 2x plus 3. 2 times x plus 3. Okay, now we have one equation and one unknown. So let's expand everything and solve the equation. 2x squared plus 6 is equal to 2x plus 6. On both sides of the equation we have a 6 and a 6, so those can cancel, so we're left with 2x squared is equal to 2x. On both sides of the equation we have a 2, so we can divide both sides by 2. And now 2 and 2 cancel, so x squared equals x. And on both sides we have an x, so we can divide both sides by x. And we get x equals 1. So now we know that x equals 1. And we can use this value and plug it into our first equation, y equals x squared. And if x equals 1, y equals 1 squared, which just equals 1. So y equals 1 and x equals 1. Be very careful reading the question. It wants to know what's the value of x times y. And in this case, xy is equal to 1 times 1, which just equals 1, which means that A is our answer. If a squared plus b squared equals z, and ab equals y, which of the following is equivalent to 4z plus 8y? Okay. There's not a numeric answer to this question. Every answer is some sort of expression with a and b. So we're given 4z plus 8y, and we have a formula that equals z and a formula that equals y. So let's take our expression 4z plus 8y and substitute the two expressions for z and y. So 4z is 4 times a squared plus b squared. That takes care of the z portion. And then 8 times ab. Okay. Now we can distribute the 4 to 4a squared plus 4b squared plus 8ab. I'm going to rearrange this. 4a squared plus 8ab plus 4b squared. And this is you have to remember the rule for expanding a perfect square binomial. So if you had x plus y squared, and you expanded that out to x plus y, and then x plus y, what would be the resulting trinomial? It would give you x squared plus 2xy plus y squared. These two trinomials have a very similar pattern, except now each term has a factor of 4 being multiplied by them. And when you go from here to here, the initial terms will square. So to go backwards to the condensed form, you'd end up having to take the square root of the coefficients of the first and the last term. And the square root of 4 equals 2. So the coefficient on a and b are both going to be 2. So this would mean that we have 2a plus 2b all squared, which means that option B is our answer. Number 11. The volume of a right circular cylinder A is 22 cubic centimeters. What is the volume in cubic centimeters of a right circular cylinder with twice the radius and half the height of cylinder A? So since we're talking about a cylinder, on the SAT it gives you a formula chart. So I'm going to go ahead and give us what the formula is for the volume of a cylinder. Cylinder A is 22 cubic centimeters. So we know that the volume is going to be 22, and it's going to equal pi times r of A squared times h of A of a right circular cylinder is twice the radius and half the height of cylinder A. So r of B is going to be twice RA, and h of B is going to be half the height, so h of A over 2. So for the volume of B, if we were to plug in these values, pi and then RB squared h of B, RB is the same as 2RA squared. HB is the same as h of A over 2. So let's simplify this. So 2 squared is 4. So far we have 4 pi RA squared, and then times h of A over 2. The 4 and the 2 can combine to be 2, and then we're left with pi RA squared h of A. And if you notice, right here is the same as this value here, which means that VB is the same as 2 times the volume of A. And since we know the volume of A is 22, VB equals 2 times 22, which equals 44. C is our answer. Number 12. Which of the following is equivalent to 9 raised to the power of 3/4? And then it gives us some options here. So the idea of this is to get that value as simple as we can. So let's see what we can do. We can rewrite this as a radical if we so choose. So one thing we can do is we can rewrite the fractional exponent as a 4th root raised 9, come on, 9 to the third. And so far, that does not really help us. So let's see what else we can do. There's another trick we can do. We can rewrite 9 to the 3/4 as 3 squared to the 3/4 because 9 equals 3 squared. Now if we leave it as in this format, we can then treat the 3 being raised to 2 individual exponents. So if we simplify 2 times 3 over 4, we can get 3 raised to the 3/2. Now this means that we have things a little bit simpler. Now let's write this as a radical. So we have 3 raised to the 3rd power, and the 1 over 2 part turns into a square root. And if we simplify this radical, this means that it's the square root of 3 times 3 times 3. Pair of 3's means 1 comes out of the radical, and we're left with 3 times the square root of 3. And there's our answer, option D. Number 13. At a restaurant, n cups of tea are made by adding tea bags to hot water. If t equals n plus 2, how many additional tea bags are needed to make each additional cup of tea? Now this one might be a little confusing, but all it's asking for is basically the relationship between n and t. If n goes up by 1, how much does t go up by? So if we have, let's start with column of n. If n equals 5, say we wanted to make 5 cups of tea. So that means, so then how many tea bags do we need? So to get t, that's just n plus 2. So that means we need 7 tea bags. If we want to add just one more, if we want to make one more cup of tea, that means 6 plus 2 tea bags, which means 8. So when n goes up by 1, t also goes up by 1. How many additional tea bags are needed? Just 1. Option B. Number 14. The function f is defined by the equation above, 2 to the x plus 1. Which of the following is the graph of y equals negative f of x in the xy plane? So this negative outside of the f of x means for all of the y values, flip them over the x-axis. Basically an up and down mirror image. But what does the function f look like? This is an exponential, which means the base function has an asymptote at 0, and then it will cross the x-axis at 0, 1. That's just what the 2 to the x part looks like. But the addition of the plus 1 means that all of these values will shift up by 1. So the asymptote will occur at the function y equals 1, but it'll shift up. Everything shifts up so that it has a y-intercept of 0, 2. So now the question is asking, what is the graph of negative f of x? So if we take all of the values in this pink function and we mirror them across the x-axis, what will it look like? So let's start with mirroring the y-intercept. If the y-intercept of the original function is at 0, positive 2, the y-intercept of negative f of x is going to be at negative 2. Now where will the asymptote be? If it's at y equals positive 1, then the asymptote's going to be at negative 1. So now it's going to come on down like this. And the option for this is C. Number 15. Alan drives an average of 100 miles per week. His car can travel an average of 25 miles per gallon of gasoline. Alan would like to reduce his weekly expenditure on gasoline by $5. Assuming gasoline costs $4 per gallon, which equation can Alan use to determine how many fewer average miles, M, he should drive each week? Okay, so there's a lot of numbers here. So let's see what we can do. Let's try to calculate how much money it will cost him per week. So, if gasoline costs $4 per gallon, $4 per 1 gallon, he can drive his car at 25 miles per gallon. So when we divide $4 per gallon by 25 miles per gallon, we can multiply by its reciprocal and get, for 1 gallon, he goes 25 miles. And if we multiply all of this by m number of miles, then that will give us the total cost. So if we look at the dimensions in this, gallons and gallons will cancel, miles and miles will cancel, and all we're left with is the number of dollars it costs for him. But this question is kind of tricky. It's looking for an equation that tells him that he wants to reduce his weekly expenditure by $5 to determine how many fewer average miles. This isn't asking for total price or total miles. It's asking for how much miles he should go down by to get a certain number of dollar reduction. So if we can still use this equation though, because we can just say number of miles reduced and total costs reduced. So if he wants to reduce his total cost by $5, then he has to figure out, basically he has to solve for m using this function, which can simplify to 4 over 25 times m. And if he wants to reduce by $5, he can solve for m and get how many miles he needs to reduce by. This is what the question is asking for, which is option D. So this is the first question where the bubble grid is used. Maria plans to rent a boat. The boat rental costs $60 per hour, and she will also have to pay for a water safety course that costs $10. Maria wants to spend no more than $280 for the rental and the course. If the boat rental is available for only a whole number of hours, what is the maximum number of hours for which Maria can rent the boat? So this is going to require us to write an equation and then solve for the total time. So we know that the total cost is 280, and she can spend no more than. So if 280 is the final price, she can spend less than or equal to that amount. Now she has to spend $10 on the course, and then she has to spend $60 per hour. So if she spends 1 hour, she'll spend $60 on the boat and then $10 for the course. So for however many hours, she spends $60 per hour plus another $10, and as long as all of that is less than 280, she's good to go. So now we have an equation, which is an inequality with one unknown, and now we can solve for h. So for this, we're going to subtract 10 from both sides. So we get 60h is less than or equal to 270. And now we divide both sides by 60. This can simplify to h is less than or equal to 27 over 6. And 27 over 6 simplifies to 9 over 2, which is equal to 4.5. So as long as she spends, less than or equal to 4.5, she's good, right? Why do I keep writing 4? 4.5. But in the problem it says it can only be rented for a whole number of hours. So 4.5 isn't going to work for this boat company. If she spends 5 hours, she will spend too much money. So for this, she has to round down to 4. So this one, the answer is 4, and we bubble in 4. Number 17. What value of p is the solution of the equation above? So it gives us 2 times the sum of p plus 1 plus 8 times p minus 1, and all of that equals 5p. So now we have an equation with one unknown. Let's solve for it. So I'm going to rewrite it. 2p plus 1 plus 8p minus 1 equals 5p. Distribute the 2 to get 2p plus 2. Distribute the 8 to get 8p minus 8 equals 5p. So now I'm going to combine like terms. My 2p and 8p make 10p. My 2 and minus 8 give me minus 6. All that equals 5p. I'm going to subtract 5p from both sides. You get 0 on the right. So I have 5p minus 6 equals 0. Add 6 to both sides. So I get 5p equals 6. So moving up to the top, 5p equals 6. Divide both sides by 5. And I can end with 6 over 5. Now this can be written as 6/5, or if you can do the math without a calculator, you can get 1.2. Both of these are acceptable answers, but to save time, you can write 6/5. So you bubble 6/5. Number 18. The system of equations above has a solution of x comma y. What is the value of x? So I get 1/2 times 2x plus y equals 21 over 2. That's my first equation. And I also have y equals 2x. Since the second equation already has y isolated, I'm going to use this portion and substitute it into the first one. So I'm going to rewrite it. 1 over 2, 2x plus y equals 21 over 2. So since y equals 2x, I'm going to take that value and plug it right in. So 1/2 2x plus 2x equals 21 over 2. So I have a 1/2 on the left and an over 2 on the right. So if I multiply both sides by 2, 2's cancel, and I have like terms in the middle. So my 2's are canceled. 2x plus 2x is 4x. So 4x equals 21. So this means I can divide both sides by 4, and I get 21 over 4 is my answer. So I can write this as 21/4, or if you choose to write it in decimal, this would be 5.25. Either of these are acceptable, but I'm going to write 21/4. So that means I bubble 21/4. Number 19. The expression above is equivalent to a divided by the sum of x plus 2 all squared, where a is a positive constant and x does not equal -2. What is the value of a? So if all of this is equal to that, let's rewrite it as one equation. 2x plus 6 over x plus 2 all squared minus 2x plus 2. If all of that is equal to a over x plus 2 squared, now we need to figure out what is the value of a. To simplify this, these two portions here can be combined. They need to have a common denominator. They both have x plus 2 in their denominator, but this one only has a single term. This squared means there's two of them in there. So we need to multiply both sides, or both the numerator and the denominator, by x plus 2. So for the numerator, we get 2 times x plus 2. On the first fraction, we're left with still 2x plus 6. And since we have combined them, that means that they all have the same denominator. And what we're left with is two large fractions that both have the same denominator. And if they both have the same denominator, that means that their numerators are equivalent. So how can this simplify? 2x plus 6 minus, I'm going to distribute the negative 2 to the x, 2x, and then the negative 2 to the positive 2. So that means minus 4, and all this equals a. Does this simplify? There's two variables. Does that help us? Notice we have 2x and minus 2x, so these cancel, so we're only left with 6 minus 4 equals a. So 2 equals a. 2 is our answer. Number 20, this is the last question. Intersecting lines R, S, and T are shown below. What is the value of x? Okay. So this x is on the opposite side of an unlabeled angle. I'm just going to call this y. And we have 106 opposite an unlabeled angle. I'm going to call this z. X plus y, since they are both complementary angles, they're going to add up to 180. 106 and z will do the same thing to add up to 180. The 23 internal angle plus z plus y also add up to 180. So we have several equations that we can use to solve for x. So let's see what we can figure out. We know that 106 plus z is equal to 180. So z is equal to 180 minus 106, which means that z is equal to, math in my head, 74. So we know that 74 degrees goes in there. So we also know that 23 plus this 74 plus the unknown angle y is equal to 180. Rewriting this, we know that y is equal to 180 minus 23 minus 74. So y is going to equal 83. So 83 is that angle. The last thing we need to figure out is the value of x. So we know that x plus 83 is going to equal 180. So x equals 180 minus 83. So x equals 97. 9, 7. 9, 7 get bubbled. And that's it. And yes, I'm sure you're probably wondering, holy cow, this video is so long. I only have 25 minutes. Why is the video so long? Well, that's because I go into kind of a lot of explanation. So just bear that in mind. When you're taking this test, you have to be very careful with your time management. So if the question looks like it's too complicated, you might as well you might consider skipping it and coming back to it if you have time at the end. Some questions only take a couple of seconds, others take a couple of minutes, but I go into some explanation, so just keep that in mind.